I think that AI might actually do some very good things for religion, but I don't think that it actually encroaches on the central message of religion. Now, when AI becomes AGI, if that ever happens, we may have a different challenge on our hands.
Hello, fellow data nerds. My guest today is Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi Wolpe is the emeritus rabbi of the Sinai Temple of Los Angeles, one of the largest synagogues in the United States. He's written extensively about ethics, beliefs, and the role of tradition in a rational, data-driven world. And he's also a longtime friend. So, Rabbi Wolpe, welcome to World of DAS.
I'm happy to be in the world.
I'm happy that you're here as well. Now, what is the role of religion in AI development?
Well, I could go way back and say that actually I really do believe that the whole idea that the world operates rationally is in its origin a religious idea, right?
Oh, okay.
Because if a God made the world according to certain rules and standards, then it makes sense both that the world has rules and standards and even that human beings are designed to be able to discover them. So you could make that argument. I mean, this is obviously it might take us far afield,
Yeah.
but the other part of it, I think, is that religion is well placed to pinpoint those things that AI does well and does not do well. Because religion is not essentially an information-based enterprise. It's an encounter and experience-based enterprise, at least as I understand it. I mean,
Yep.
other religious figures may feel differently. So what I
Because
would
part
say
of the
is that
religion is like the community and how you
it's the
feel and
community
being
and the
there when
encounter,
someone goes through hardship or goes through a death or et
and
cetera.
and even the idea of God is obviously it's less informational than experiential. That
Yep.
is, ultimately, you can't prove or disprove God. I mean,
Yep.
people have been arguing it for thousands of years, but at least according to my tradition, you can encounter God, which is a very different sort of claim. So I think that AI might actually do some very good things for religion. I think that it will give it, um, first of all, a lot more information immediately, and even difficult questions that people ask rabbis, you can get, at your fingertips.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it actually encroaches on the central message of religion, which is that human beings occupy a unique niche in the universe, um, and are both part of nature and also out of nature. Um, Now, when AI becomes AGI, if that ever happens, we may have a different challenge on our hands.
Now, even in the short term, just like today, people have like AI therapists. You could have an
Right.
AI religious leader or an AI kind of rabbi or an AI priest or an AI minister or something like that, where you could ask questions. You could
Right.
have a talk to. Obviously, maybe not as good as the real thing, but maybe more accessible to people. Or maybe for some people, kind of like when you go to
Right.
confession with the priest, maybe you want to be a little bit more anonymous. And you want to have this conversation without them necessarily knowing who you are, et cetera.
So that's an interesting question, is if AI absolves you, does that have the same psychological and spiritual impact as
Yeah,
if a priest absolves you? I don't know.
yeah,
Also, in my experience, and this again, it's the same question. A lot of what people come to a rabbi for are questions they already know the answer to, but they don't trust their own instincts without some kind of, yes, that makes sense, that is all right.
Mm.
For that, AI might be.
What would be an example of something like that?
So someone will come and say, um, my father is abusive to me, like really abusive. And I want to cut off contact with him because, I mean, when I'm in his presence, he can be physically abusive. When I talk to him, he's emotionally abusive. And if he were different, I would be in contact with him. But right now, every time I speak to him, he's abusive, and I know the Ten Commandments say you should honor your father and mother.
Mm,
Is that okay? And when the rabbi says, yes, actually, you don't have to be in contact with a truly abusive parent, I think it makes it feel easier for the child to be able to say, this is really ethically okay.
yeah. Okay, got it. Interesting. Now these LLMs and AI, they can already mimic like creativity, empathy,
I know.
sometimes even wisdom. How should we think differently about like this idea of AI and personhood?
So I think I'm like, I mean, this is not obviously unique to religious thinking about it, but if we believe that there's an internal experience to the other, it's very different than if we believe the other has this almost uncanny ability to muster words that are helpful. Um, and so I think that people will want to believe that the other actually feels what they feel or understands what they feel. And absent that, I'm not sure it'll have the same impact the on the seeker, because you will ultimately be alone in your search, even though
Yeah.
AI might be able to respond to you.
And the one of the going back to that therapist
Yeah.
thing, like how do you feel when you may have people in your congregation using it as some sort of therapist, some sort of tool? Like how do you think about that?
It worries me a little. First of all, I just on a very practical level, as you and I both know very well, AIs are still subject to some wild hallucinations.
Yeah.
Um, and you can't, at least in my experience, you can't always talk them out of it. No, this quote does not exist in the Bible. Can you give me the one that does? And they'll
Yeah.
give you the same quote. And
Yeah.
so um, there isn't a good system of checks for that.
Yeah.
And that's one worry. That's one worrisome thing. But and at least I've read recently, and you know more about this than I do, certainly, that the stronger AI gets, the more it seems to hallucinate, which is really bizarre and interesting, but also dangerous.
Yes.
So the other piece of this is that I think for some things, like AI can be a really helpful therapeutic presence, because a lot of what people ask, I don't know how to say this in a way that is like tender, but a lot of what people ask, you'd be really surprised that they ask. And you recognize these are people who probably did not grow up with like even decent parenting, because if they did, they would know that, for example, when your 14-year-old daughter says, I hate you, that's what 14-year-old daughters often do, and it should
Yeah.
not destroy your world.
Yeah.
Um, so for things like that, I think AI could probably be very helpful, because it's crowdsourced in the most right gigantic way, and say this
Yeah.
is a common experience of parents of teenage daughters, for example.
And my guess is so many human therapists are pretty subpar as well. So
That's
it's
another
it's
that's
it's
another issue.
possible it might be as good as the average human, or so maybe not as good as the best human or
Right.
something.
The
Yeah.
truth is that I think that that's true. That a lot of therapists are like a lot of almost every profession that
Sure.
requires a really high degree of understanding and empathy and insight. I mean, such people are harder to get than, and also I think there's another reason why therapists um, aren't as good as they might be. I'm going to be honest about this, is because a lot of people of real skill and insight and wisdom who would have gone into the humanities in one way or another are now going into fields like finance and software, fields that are more remunerative. So I'm actually worried that the next generation, they might be even less skilled.
Interesting. One thing, if you think of like a marital
Yeah.
listening and stuff like that. Let's say I come home from a hard days of work, my wife comes home for a hard day of work, and I just want my spouse to listen to me, or she
Yeah.
just wants me to listen to her. But it's actually really hard to listen, especially if you're
Yes.
listening for like 30 minutes or
Yep.
something, and you're like, God, it's a tough thing to go do that.
Yes.
But okay, as a spouse, I'm supposed to listen. That's what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
So I'm gonna try to do my best, but I'm not gonna put my problems on my other.
Yep.
An AI would be like so much better
It
at
would
that.
be so much better.
Like an
And it would
AI
never
husband
forget
would
it.
be so much better than me in so many ways. Yeah.
It wouldn't forget your complaints, and it wouldn't do what I just did to you, which is interrupt. So
Well,
it's
maybe
actually
a little interruptions may be
maybe a
good.
little,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's true. It's like it will remember. Didn't you say about that person at work 3 weeks ago that they did this to you then? And you go, "Oh my God, yes." And
Totally.
your spouse might not remember that,
Yeah,
but the
yeah,
AI
yeah,
would.
yeah.
It's true. There's no question. I mean, look, used as a smart tool, it could be great. The problem that human beings tend to have with tools is they expect too much of them, especially if the tools are as sort of omnicompetent as AI seems to be.
Now, when I was getting involved in AI, 15 years ago, I'd say almost 100% of people I met in AI were like extreme atheists. Now, most of the people I know, they're kind of extreme creationists. They believe they're in a simulation. So it's
Mm.
essentially they believe there's a God that created the world. Like how do you think that happened? If you're enjoying this podcast, please sign up for our newsletter. Go to worldofdas.com. The link is in the description below. Now back to the video.
I have a very off the cuff theory. Okay, this is not. Don't take this to the bank, but here goes. Do you know the quote by the biologist J.B.S. Haldane, who himself was not a believer? One of his famous quotes is someone asked him what he's learned about God by being a biologist, and he said the creator has an inordinate fondness for beetles, because there are so many different kinds. So he's not like, but he once said, the world is not only queerer than we suppose, it is queerer than we can suppose.
Mm,
And I think the more you actually get down to the foundations of anything that is baffling, the more it induces a certain intellectual humility where you feel like there is intelligence beyond us. It may not be that I come to the God of the Bible. I don't necessarily think that that intelligence said to Abraham, go. But it's really hard to see these marvels and think it's totally blind chance. So I understand the simulation idea, the attraction of the imagination that there are worlds that we can't begin to really understand.
yeah, interesting. Now, in the Jewish religion, you're supposed to keep kosher. You're not supposed to
Right.
eat pork. How do you think? I mean, maybe this is already resolved by the
Right.
rabbis that be or something. But what about like lab grown bacon? Like, can you eat that as a?
I mean, this is actually a really fascinating question. And yes, I would say it has been resolved, but it hasn't been resolved. That is,
Okay,
rabbis have opined on it, but I don't think there's any perfect consensus. If, I won't go into all the legal detail. There are a lot of different ways of approaching this legally, but I think in the end, there's going to be um, for most religious Jews, a sort of visceral, this doesn't feel right to me,
mm,
so I'm not going to partake in the same way that, like, I've been a vegetarian for decades. I think lab grown meat would be hard for me to eat just because I have been so conditioned not to eat meat, even though now there would be no ethical objection
right.
to it. So I think that that's probably where the majority of the religious world will come down, but it's so new and so different, um, that I can't say for sure. I'll give you an analogy, which is kind of an interesting one, I think, for your listeners. According to the Jewish tradition, the mother classically decides whether the child is Jewish, and the
Yep,
reason is because you always know who the mother is.
yep.
Not only that, but even if you implant a Jewish embryo in a non Jewish woman and the non Jewish woman gives birth, according to Jewish law, the child has to be converted
Wait, what?
because,
Oh, I had no idea.
because the birth mother is not Jewish.
Ah, okay,
And
got
so
it.
you
So if the
say, well,
surrogate is not
because
Jewish,
the surrogate is not Jewish, but that's according to Jewish law, it's whoever gives birth to the baby. So here's a
I
case
got
where
so
this,
what about if the egg is a donor who isn't Jewish, or you
if
don't
the
even
egg
know
is a
whether?
donor who isn't Jewish and a Jewish surrogate gives birth, the baby's Jewish.
Oh, I had
Because
no idea.
because
Oh,
the birth mother, which is the only kind of mother that
right,
traditional Judaism knew, is Jewish. Now,
got it.
as you
So
just
you could
saw,
have you could like some Christians could have a Jewish baby without even knowing it because they may
absolutely,
not ask the
that's
question,
right.
of the surrogate.
Yep.
Okay,
So now, as you all saw from Auren's reaction, this is completely counterintuitive in the modern world.
yeah.
But whether that law will change over time is a real question, because when you have a law for thousands of years that makes sense, and then for 20 years or 30 years or 50 years, it doesn't make sense the same way, it's still the conservative force of a religious tradition really fights against it.
Now, what about if you think of adultery, okay, I think we all know what adultery is, but if you
Yeah.
have like a relationship with an AI girlfriend or
Right.
something, and it's a real relationship, are you cheating on your spouse? You not like, how does one
Um,
think about that religiously? I mean, intuitively, I think you would be like if you go back to your
right.
intuition, but like,
Well,
I don't know.
here's an
Yeah.
easy test. Does your spouse know?
Oh, right, right. So if you didn't tell your spouse, if it was a
Then,
secret, then
right.
probably it's wrong.
Then it's some kind of betrayal, even if
That's
not
right.
an
That's right.
explicit
Okay.
betrayal.
Yeah.
Um, but if your spouse has a robot on the side and you have a robot on the
Right, right, right. I
side,
guess if you're open about it, then it's an open
I wonder what that would
relationship.
be. I
Yeah.
mean, these are again,
Polyamory with AIs or
right, with
something. Yeah.
AI.
Yeah.
The circuitry gets very complicated.
Yeah.
But
I mean, in
what
my
you're saying,
relationship, we have to even tell each other if we're like gonna like watch the Netflix series without the other person or something. Yeah.
well, that's already serious.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's like cutting the turkey without me. The these questions are just like the beginning of, and you and I both, I mean, my brother Paul, who's an ethicist,
Yeah.
is a friend of yours, and he always says that people think ethical questions are a choice between right and wrong, but they never are. The really
Yeah.
hard ones are choices between two rights, and you have to
Yes.
decide which one takes precedence. And
Yeah.
so here, for example, it's not none of these questions will be easy because we're introducing a new component and we don't know yet how it will play out. Um, but I would say that having a relationship like that with even with a non-human entity, the possibilities for the disruption of the relationship with your partner are really immense. So
Yes.
it's a
For sure.
dangerous enterprise, you
Yeah.
know?
Now, when you talk about people about prolonging lifespan, and that's obviously very a trendy thing right now. Something maybe you're prolonging for decades,
Yeah.
maybe even in the future hundreds of years. Like, how does that make you think?
Um, First of all, it raises certain practical questions, like does that mean that we stop procreating? Because what's the world going to do with babies that keep coming and adults that don't die? Um, and also, you know, it's funny because you and I both know people who can't figure out how to spend a Saturday night, but they want to live forever. I don't know how they're going to do with that.
Totally.
But I would say if that ever happens, it's going to require a huge adjustment in 1,000 cultural um, forms and adaptations and ways of living. And, the one thing that I will say about it is it's death that gives the values that we treasure in life. Because, for example, if you say, I had a fight with my friend, but I'll make up with them in 100 years,
Yeah.
or it's actually the knowledge that we have a certain limited time that
Yeah.
gives urgency and priority to the way we live. So I don't know how that would be if we had a virtually unlimited time.
Yeah. That now what about things like even like more, crazy, like uploading our consciousness or something? Like, is that a way of like dodging spirituality or
Um, It is, I mean, it depends what the essence of you is. If the essence of you is your, what you're calling your consciousness and I'll call your soul,
Yeah,
if that's actually transferable to another
to the cloud.
creature, all I would say is that the idea of reincarnation was basically that,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Reincarnation was my soul now goes into another creature. And that wasn't considered outside the realm of religion. Now, in Judaism, people may not know that reincarnation does exist in Judaism. It's not a mainstream belief, but it is certainly in especially mystical Judaism in the Kabbalah. So if that idea can exist inside religious traditions, maybe we get reincarnated
Hmm.
into, silicon.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Um, and you know, there's this idea that we're created in the image of God.
Right.
If we create something in our own image, like AI, like what obligations do we have as creators?
Is it a knockoff image? Is it
Yeah,
a second order image
yeah,
of God? I think again, it all I it comes down to internal experience, which is consciousness, which is the nub of so much of this discussion, and whether consciousness is real or primary, or the panpsychics think that consciousness is like a constituent, a basic constituent of the world, and maybe it is, but I think that the obligation that you owe to another creature has to do with the degree of that creature's ability to have internal experience and to in some way participate in the same kind of being that you do. So that's why we have obligations to animals, which have some kind of internal, may not be our internal experience, but still is real. And we don't feel the same kind of obligation, for example, um, to an ant or a stone,
yeah.
because we see that as a much lower order or no order at all. So it depends how we're going to evaluate these AI creatures. And as you know, people are all over the place on this right now. And we just don't know. And I don't even know how we could know. I mean, if you have any theories about that, I'd love to hear it. How will you know if an AI has consciousness when it responds, when it can pass the Turing test with no
Yeah,
problem,
yeah.
and it responds
It's
to
passed
us
the
just
Turing
like a
test a
person?
while ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very interesting. When I take a Waymo, I when I close
Yeah.
the door, I always kind of like I wave to it and stuff. I don't know why. Just like
I
it's just
know.
kind of intuitive, and I feel like there's some, and I write like please and thank you to the AIs and stuff, and
So you're forcing me to admit something embarrassing, which is most mornings I take the same walk around my neighborhood, and there's a Waymo that's always in the same place, and I like unconsciously say good morning to it as though it's waiting for, because it's always got that spinning thing. It's the only
right,
car that's
right,
actually in motion, and
yeah.
I feel like there's David on his morning walk, and I
Totally,
know
yeah.
it's
I mean, it may
insane.
know you. It
It's
may have a.
insane, but that's how
It
it
would be
feels.
great. Like next time, if you
Yeah.
said, and then like threw a good joke at you or
I
something.
know.
It's like, here's my joke of the day,
So
David.
that's
Yeah,
the
yeah,
question: um, at what point does a simulation become the thing, and is there always an unbridgeable gap between the two? And my instinct is there is. I don't think that AI could be conscious the way we are, but that's just my intuition. I have no idea if I'm correct.
No, it seems like regular church or regular synagogue attendance has been on the decline in the U.S. for decades.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think the future is like?
There's a, I mean, this is one of those things that I think it's really overdetermined. There are a lot of reasons for it. Among them is that we live in a very anti-institutional age,
Yep,
and even people who feel religious don't necessarily like religious institutions.
yep,
Um, so the optimistic part of me, because I like religious institutions, thinks, things wax and wane, and that might change.
hmm,
But the other part of me says, it might be that we are in the process at this point in human history of discovering and expressing a different way of uh, of worship and of relation. my concern with that um, is that religion gives guidelines for behavior, not just for feeling, and that actually really does matter. And I worry that the decline of one is also part of the decline of the other, that there was more civility in the world when people felt religiously obligated, and more sense of communal duty towards one another when people felt religiously obligated. Like in any synagogue or mosque or church in this country, you will find people who regularly feed each other, take care of each other, and so
Yep.
on, because that's what they're supposed to do.
And is there a sense that, because people do have a longing for community, like that is every human
Yes,
or almost every human has that longing.
right,
And for many humans, it's not being met right now. Now,
right,
maybe the churches and synagogues and mosques weren't meeting it. So maybe they
right,
weren't doing the right, maybe they weren't good enough at that, or they were, they weren't inclusive enough, or they were just, it was just a show, or that it was just like long and boring or something. And they went out of obligation rather than
right.
getting more out of it or something.
I think they were good at the community part, but they were not they were not as good at the doing things that would make people want to join in the community part. So um, here's a problem that exists. I'm sure this exists in companies, but here it exists in synagogues. You have a certain kind of service or program. All the people who support your synagogue and are older like that program.
Yes.
All the people who don't give you a penny and are younger but are your future don't like that program.
Yes.
So you have a choice. You can change the way you do the service.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll attract some younger people, but you'll drive away the people who support the synagogue
It's
and
like you're
keep it
selling
going.
Pond's soap or something, and
Right,
you need to have like a new brand of soap.
right. So what
Now, can't you do
do?
both? Could you just sell like the
You
Ponds
try.
at 9:30 and
Yep.
the better new brand at the other
That's
time or
exactly
something?
what a
Or,
lot of synagogues try. We've done that.
yeah.
We have single services for younger people and then older services, but it's very resource intensive,
Yes.
and it's just hard to do. And also, even sometimes, even the architecture of the building that you're in, or there are a lot of variables. But the last real difficulty is traditional forms of religion, like what Orthodoxy and Judaism, fundamentalism and other traditions, which are not exactly identical. But in other words, the further you go towards literalism in every religion, the better the religions are doing. And I think that a lot of that is because if you have a literal belief that this is what God wants you to do, so you do it.
Yep. It's
But
easier.
anything less than God wants you to do it is going to be then you have to sell it. It's good for you. It's good for the community. It's part of history. It's on and on and on. And all those reasons are intrinsically less powerful than the creator of the universe told you to do it.
Is this why you think there's so many Protestant men that are converting to Catholicism? Is that it's just more prescriptive and kind of easier to
I
follow?
think a belief that it is ultimately rooted in transcendence and not um, in helping you lead a better life is actually more powerful.
Mm.
We think as America, what's important is the pursuit of happiness. But actually, if you want to get people to do something, believing that God wants you to do it is, I think, the best motivator if you really believe it.
Yep.
I had once, let me give you an example that a friend of mine, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, once gave me, which I think is a beautiful example. He said, I know people who are like severely overweight and they have clogged arteries, and their doctor tells them, do not eat this or that because it really could kill you. And they still eat it. But if you had said to those same people, it actually isn't kosher, they would never touch it. And that's amazing. And he's right. And that's amazing. It's like certain motivations override everything,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Also, certain things you may have been doing all your life, so maybe
Right.
easier also to,
That's
if
true
all of a
too.
sudden you told someone
Right.
you can't eat lobster, they might be
Yep.
a little bit like miffed or
That's
something.
probably true. As somebody who's never had a lobster in his life, it wouldn't be hard for me. But
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And what I mean, when you think of, there are a lot of people bemoaning the fact that the fertility rate is down in most countries and pretty much
Yes.
every country in the world.
Right.
Um, I'm not even sure if it is correlated to religiosity or not, because some, even in the most religious countries,
So
often the birth rate is down.
here's a really interesting thing, I think. I was just watching, actually, there's you go on YouTube and you end up watching stuff that you didn't know you had any interest
I
in.
do it
There was
all
a
the
thing about
time.
the fertility rate in Japan,
Yes.
and so I was watching that. And they said, in all these developed countries, Japan happens to be the model for what happens because it's been happening for 30 years. But all these developed countries, the one country that's a developed country where that isn't true is Israel.
Yeah.
And in Israel, it's not only that the birth rate of the ultra Orthodox is high, we would expect that, but even of the secular, like the Tel Aviv Israeli, who's as secular
Yeah.
as any European,
Yep.
the birth rate is higher. And there, I think it's because there's a sense of collective meaning and future that's important. And so if you think you're having a child for yourself, yeah, one is okay, two is
Yeah.
fine. But if you think you're having a child for the collective future, then you're more likely to have, I think, a bigger family.
Yeah. And well, it's also like if you think of the upwardly mobile person in Israel, they live in Tel
Yeah,
Aviv.
right.
And so wherever they are, they live somewhere near their family within a couple hours drive
That is
of
also
their
good point.
family. The
Good point.
upwardly mobile person in Europe or in the US could be, thousands of miles away from their family. And it just may be more difficult
That
to
is
do that.
true. Because if you have family around or community around that raises kids communally, it's obviously takes a huge burden
Yeah. By the way, one
off
of
the
the things
parents.
about Japan, the thing a lot of people
Yeah,
know about is 30 years ago, they were the lowest birth rate, basically, or in the world. Right now, they're like approaching the middle.
really
So they're
interesting.
actually been flat on birth rate for like the last 20 something years.
Right, that's
So
what
they're
it
about
said.
1.3 TFR.
Yep.
And South Korea is now 0.7 TFR. So
Right.
they're almost like twice as good in terms. Well,
Yep.
good is relative, but if you believe having kids is good, they're almost twice as good as South Korea. They're better
Right.
than Italy, Spain. So their birth rate is actually like above
It's stable.
many
But
European
it's not
countries now.
replacement rate, and they live a long time,
Correct.
which places
Yes,
a huge economic burden on the generation above you.
that's
So,
true. That's a very true. That's a very good point. Um, Now, one of the things you're best known for is having these like public debates with prominent atheists like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris. What's your goal of like engaging with them?
so my goal, I mean, I haven't done it in a while. My goal, especially when the new atheist movement was at its height,
Yeah,
although
and
I
that was like
still
20 years ago when it was
right.
really at its
My
height,
goal
right? Yeah.
was honestly, I mean, this sounds ridiculous. I wanted to show people who assumed that in order that 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 you had to be stupid or foolish and have no good arguments to be a believer,
Hmm.
that in fact you could marshal some very sound arguments, and that faith throughout its history has engaged in these kinds of questions and has something to say to these questions. And that does I was not doing it with the intention of persuading people to believe. I was
Yeah,
doing it with the intention of giving them more respect for the intellectual respectability of belief.
interesting. And how do you think that went?
um, So, I mean, look, most of the people who came to the debates were people who were atheists and wanted to see the believer get trounced.
Yeah,
And so, if you look, for example, on most of the comments on the debate will be, exactly that. But I've had many letters over the years and emails from people who will say something like, I'm not a believer, but I thought that you made good points and I
yeah,
appreciated the fact that you did it. And so I think in the end, it was more productive than not. And weirdly, I mean, with Christopher and with Sam, I mean, I became friends with them, and really, I gained a lot out of it. And I certainly think it was an interesting experience for me. So I'm glad I did it, and I think it was a good thing to do, and I hope it was good for the people who watched.
it's interesting because when that new atheist movement, which was kind of like, let's say, 2003 to 2006. It was a very brief time when it was super popular.
Right.
Like it was super popular for a very brief
Right.
time, and then it just kind of faded. Like no one really talks about it anymore. There's none. You never see a best-selling book talking about that today.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think it was like such a quick kind of?
I
And
think
even people like it was even trendy to say you're an atheist. Now people who are they may not believe they're almost like say they're agnostic. They don't say they're atheists anymore.
I think so much of it was a reaction to 9/11
Yeah.
and to the idea that extreme fundamentalism was a danger to Western society.
Yeah, certainly the Sam
all,
Harris part was that
right,
for sure.
And
right?
and
yeah.
Hitchens too felt like he was defending the West, and so I think that was a big part of it. And I don't why it faded so fast though. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, really, it was very much of a fad.
It was.
And yeah, it's really interesting. Now, would you ever like in your own kind of course, and do you ever like pray that technology will fail?
I mean, I admit that there's a big piece of me that hopes that AGI is never achieved, that non-human things never actually get consciousness for all the reasons, for all the reasons that run from the Eliezer Yudkowsky, they're going to destroy us, to the religion, like this really is a tremendous challenge to a religious worldview. So in that sense, yes. But I also do know that if we can work out the ability to retain our humanness and increase technology, that you look at every indices of human like longevity and so on and so on. And it all starts like with a hockey stick with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And as somebody, I've had both a brain tumor and lymphoma, and my life was saved by both times, by advanced medical technology. So I'm not going to be the Luddite who says, I wish technology would fail when I know that I wouldn't be here if it did.
Now, very soon, I mean, I'm really already, AI can train a model on your sermons, your books, your teachings. It could answer questions in video that looks like your voice.
Oh my God.
Right. I mean, that we're basically there already. I mean, someone could have a meeting with you and probably get the same anecdotes I could probably do this almost very soon. Like I could just do this podcast with an AI and get almost the same thing, maybe not like quite as good, but it's getting there, right? Like the same anecdotes you probably have given sometime and some of the same kind of jokes, right? I mean, I mean, how do you think about that? How do you process that as a religious
leader? Is this
leader?
time for me to tell you that actually it's not me who's answering these questions?
That would be awesome. That would be so awesome if you're like, take off the mask. Like, exactly. It's actually an AI the whole time.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
I find that.
I mean, that's coming, right?
I find it deeply unnerving. And I wonder... but I will also say, like, I have a lot of faith in the human ability to recreate our mission. So I think we'll find new things to do that mean something to us. I really hope that that's so, even though I do see dangers, obviously, in AI, like everybody does, because the incentives for safety are not nearly as strong as the incentives for development, and that worries me. But I think maybe it'll be like, yes, it's possible. I mean, I have in my pocket a machine that could beat Magnus Carlsen at chess.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I still would rather watch Magnus Carlsen. I flew all the way to Dubai to see him in the World Chess Championship years ago against Nepo. Because it was very cool. Because I thought he is arguably the greatest player ever, maybe the greatest player ever, and he or Kasparov or Fischer, I think.
Yeah, I think it's Carlsen.
And here it was. I have a chance to actually watch him. I want to see him before that's not possible. So
that's so cool.
I went there, and it was great to do, even though I knew that, as I said, I had something in my pocket that could probably beat him, and now could certainly beat him.
I mean, but like I can drive faster than the fastest marathon runner. And,
exactly.
It's like, so anyone can.
I hope that human endeavor will still have its special magic for humans.
Okay, interesting. Now you're also opine a lot and think a lot about like different there's been all this stuff about different anti-Semitism on campus,
Yeah.
Harvard, Columbia, all this stuff. Like, what are your thoughts about it?
I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I'll restrict myself to this. First of all, it is look, anti-Semitism is an ancient and protean hatred. By protean, I just mean people can hate Jews for anything.
Yeah.
They can hate them for being capitalists or communists or weak and
Yeah, sometimes
stateless
the
or
same side
strong
of
and
the coin.
stateful.
It's like they got both
It doesn't
sides.
matter.
They're
It doesn't
weak, they're
matter.
too weak, and they're too strong, or something, right? Like that's a
So
good. Yeah.
I hope that people will realize, though, that it is always a prelude to other kinds of destruction. Like it starts with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. Never,
Yep.
never, never, never. It didn't in the Spanish Inquisition. It didn't, with Nazi Germany. It didn't. It's always bad for a society, and we see it now on the right, on the left, and jihadism. There are sort of three strands of anti-Semitism, and I think that it cannot be cured by Jews. It has to be. I mean, there are many, many, many more non-Jews than Jews. We're like 2% of the American population and 0.2% of the world. If non-Jews don't stand up against anti-Semitism, we're in terrible trouble. So I hope that we will get more of a recognition among the non-Jewish community that this is a real threat.
Okay, a couple closing questions. What is a conspiracy theory that you believe?
What's a conspiracy theory that I believe? Um, Boy, I'm really not very conspiratorial minded, but I would say that I think there is a conspiracy to argue that Oswald was not the sole assassin.
Oh,
How's
you
that?
think there's a conspiracy of the conspiracy?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. An anti-conspiracy conspiracy. Yeah, I think that. Well, let me put it. I think that a lot of people who have common interests in. I'll use this as a conspiracy theory. I think a lot of people who have common interests in undermining the values of the West conspire with one another, despite the fact that they have disagreements in their basic values, which is how
Yeah.
you get queers for Hamas. That's
Yeah.
a conspiracy that wants to undermine the West, and it's a dangerous one.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. Last question we ask all of our guests: what
Yeah.
conventional wisdom or advice do you think is generally bad advice?
I am not the only person to say this, but I think that it's important to telling young people to just follow their dream.
Okay.
I think you should tell them to follow their gifts. And if they follow their gifts, that is what they're good at. They will discover, in fact, that opens the door to their dreams. That their dream is very abstract, but their gifts are very concrete. And you might think what you want is to be X or Y or Z, but you discover in the process of actually working out your gifts that it gives you tremendous joy and satisfaction.
And do you have do you think people have a good sense of what their gifts are?
Some do and some don't. I think it
Yeah.
varies. Like I knew I was very lopsided as a student. I was always words. I was books and letters and speeches and words. And I always loved that more than anything else, even more than music, more than anything.
Yeah.
Um, Other students, I think, have to try a variety of things to discover what they're good at. And by the way, sometimes they're lucky enough to have mentors or friends who will say to them, you know, you're good at this. Like when I was in high school, there was a kid who kept beating me at chess. That was how I became a chess player.
Uh-huh.
But then when I met really good chess players, I said to myself, you are not gifted at this game. You will be a fine tournament chess player. And I was a fine tournament chess player, but not even close. But that was a good experience, you know?
Yeah, it's very hard to know. Like, also, should you, lean into your strengths or should you work on your weaknesses?
I'm of the lean into your strengths. I
Yeah.
would rather see somebody who is outstanding at X than okay at X and mediocre at Y. So I really, I mean, now obviously, like any general rule, there are always
Yeah, if
exceptions,
it's
but as a
debilitating,
rule,
if you're, a heroin addict and you're about to die,
right?
you should
Yes,
probably quit heroin or
probably
something.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as a rule, I think leaning into your strengths. is a really good thing. And the one other thing that I would say is that the most important quality to lead a good life is courage. Because without courage, and it can be, I'm talking emotional courage, not like,
Yeah.
without courage, you're a slave. And I think
And how
and
does
it's
one
also a muscle.
develop courage? And how does
It's a
one
muscle you can
and
work on. Do
you
things
know
you're
and
afraid of.
you could be courageous in one area and not
Right,
courageous in another, right? I mean, you might certain social situations you might be okay being
right.
disliked, and other ones you might really need to follow the herd, right?
It's true. But the great thing about it is when you do something courageous and you realize you survive, it helps you the next time. It is kind of like a
Yes.
muscle.
Yeah.
Nobody's courageous in everything, but when you do some things that take some courage, it really does help for you to know that the next time you'll be okay. As I once told my daughter when there was a big blow up at the synagogue, doesn't matter what it was, and I said to her, "But you see, I'm okay." I said, and I told her that Churchill said after the Boer War, "It's exhilarating to be shot at without result." So
Well, one of the things, I mean, in the courage world is that um, there are many things that people they think they need courage for because they're afraid of, but often the consequences in any scenario are quite low. And so you
yes,
actually really don't need that much courage if you're like rational about it, in
I think
some
that's
ways.
true.
Like
Yeah,
if you give a speech that bombs, like you tell a joke that bombs, or you
right.
ask a girl out and she says no, or something like
Yeah,
that. It really, in some ways, like you think you need a lot of courage, but you actually don't. But then there are other cases where you really do need courage because the consequences are,
are
and
hard.
there could be speaking out or something,
Right,
or in an institution or some other type of thing where you could lose your job.
right.
Worse, you could be ostracized from your community,
Or you hurt people that care about you,
or you
which is
hurt people
also
that care
true.
about you, right? Which is
Right.
often courage, telling people the
Yeah.
truth about things,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yeah.
very interesting. All right. Well, this has been amazing. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
this conversation.
Me
Thank
too.
you,
Thank you
David
so
Wolpe,
much.
for joining us, World of Dash. By the way, I follow you at Rabbi Wolpe on X. I definitely encourage our listeners to engage with you there. This has
Thank
been
you.
a ton of fun.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to World of Das wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and more. And please help us get discovered by leaving a review. And check out worldofdas.com. That's worldofdas.com. And of course, connect with me on Twitter at Auren. That's AUREN. Would absolutely love to hear from you.